First up, we have got ourselves the Quetzal, and this creature in my opinion is one which is extremely underrated, mainly due to its speed, as a lot of people just say, well, it's so slow, I literally can't use this thing. It is the most useless creature out there, and albeit I do admit that its speed is pretty slow for most people's standards, it still is an extremely useful creature for any general task which you may do in any given arc scenario. For PvP players and for PvE players, it works both ways, as you can use these things as great metal gatherers, albeit they don't gather metal, they just transfer metal, so maybe resource transferers. And you can even build a base on the back of this thing as well, which can actually be a pretty OP strat in some PvP situations, although I would probably go with a Raft base over a Quetz base, but definitely for PvE use it is a really cool thing to have, and I don't really get why people don't talk about these things quite as much anymore. Next up, we have got the Carbinosaurus, and most people probably just view this creature as a source of keratin, and albeit it is a great source of keratin, if you need keratin, always kill a Carbinosaurus. That's just the way you go. Keratin's a lot easier to get from insects, by the way, and you generally get a lot more of it, so I wouldn't generally get keratin for things like saddles, but if you want to have keratin, then you can get keratin from these things. But the thing is, with this creature, it is a great window into the underwater world of Ark, and it's the only real underwater able creature that I'm putting on this list. Like, none of the other creatures here are really great underwater creatures, but maybe apart from the next one actually when I'm thinking about it, but this creature is a really great opening creature into, let's say, ocean exploration, because it's reasonably quick in the water, albeit it's not going to be the fastest, and it spawns on land, so you don't need to go into the ocean, albeit an Ichthyosaurus can be obtained pretty easily these days, and, you know, across all time really, but there's loads of traps if you want to do that for an Ichthyosaurus. Not really strictly necessary, but they spawn in shallow areas and you can get those, but having a carb in the early stages to get some of that oil gathered in the early stages just really seems to help me out. Next up, we have the Bufo, and this creature has to be here. Come on, the king of cementing paste gathering, and albeit some of you may just say, well, this isn't an underrated creature at all, and it's like the best creature for me pretty much because I can get so much cementing paste with it. A lot of people don't use it, and I used to be one of those people a couple of months ago, and I've switched to this thing now, and I really can't go back. Like, it's so consistent in the way it gathers any kind of cementing paste. There's only really one kind, but you can technically say there's many because there's loads of different ways of getting it. I would usually get it from beaver dams, and quite a lot of Ark players do. It's just really easy, and you could obviously craft it as well, but that is quite slow. Whereas with this thing, you can just kill loads of insects, go into the insect cave on the island, and boom, you can have tens of thousands of cementing paste, and you might actually be encumbered because of all of that. But either way, you can just get so much with this thing, it really has to be on this list, and it is also a pretty good underwater creature as well. You know, it really does have quite a lot of agility underwater, albeit doesn't pack the most amount of damage. It still is extremely useful, especially in ASA actually now, as insects no longer have levels. In at number 7, we have the Bionics, and this creature had to be here in my opinion, and a lot of people are actually moving over to creatures like the Shadowmen now for all of their caving needs, but I really do think the Bionics deserves a place on the list, and actually deserves a place in everyone's Ark life for being a great caving creatures, albeit the Shadowmen can do a hell of a lot more than the Baryonyx in quite a lot of aspects. The Baryonyx can also do a couple of things which, you know, the Shadowmen can't. The first main advantage actually to this thing is its taming method is so much easier, and you can obviously, because of that, get it much earlier in the game, and also it can stun creatures underwater as well. Albeit, yeah, not the biggest edge over the Shadowmen, I still think it really has a very useful place as a very great caving creature, and I've used these things for years and years now, and albeit, yes, Shadowmen are great for doing cave runs, I still always come back to this creature. It's just the general basics for me. I know how to use this creature really well and effectively, and I don't really think that I need anything more than a Baryonyx. And albeit a Shadowman can be very useful and all, but if I think that you don't really need anything more than the Baryonyx, then maybe do you actually need more than the Baryonyx? And this thing is very easily possible. Not to say that it's a bad creature, it's like, oh, well, you don't really need anything more than it. It is still a very great creature, it's just it's much easier to get your hands on. Next up, we have got the Diodon, and this is a very brief entry, obviously, because the BR for this thing is really short, because there's not too much to say, but they're just really great small pack flying creatures, and they could deal a heck of a lot of damage, especially to players, as they do player-based damage instead of rider-based damage, which can play a huge advantage in a lot of scenarios. And I think people don't give this creature enough credit, and that's why it's on this list. And next up, in the number 5 spot, of course, we have the Carnotaurus. And most people will just be like, well, the Aloe's better. There's nothing more to say. But we're talking about underrated creatures here, and obviously the Aloe isn't really too much of an underrated creature. Yeah, the Rex gets a lot more attention than it, and the Giga gets a lot more attention than the Aloe. But I think the Carno gets even less attention, and especially less attention than this creature actually deserves, as this pretty much my favorite art creature. But I'm not going to be so biased and just put my favorite art creature right then in the number 1 spot, because there are a lot of other art creatures which are extremely useful to me, and this is, yes, albeit my favorite, it's still, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be in the number 1 spot, as there are some more useful underrated creatures, and my personal and emotional bias, I'm not going to play a huge factor into this video, because, you know, I'm making this for you, I'm not making it for me. If I was making it for me, they'd kind of be right in the number 1 spot, but I'm making it for you, so I'm slightly generalising my list here. The reason why I think the Carno is so good, I don't know why it's taken me so long, I've just blabbered on about everything. It deals the bleed ability, it's relatively small compared to things like the Aloe, it does a sizable amount of damage, it's got a good health stat, and it's got good mobility. And albeit its weight isn't perfect, it could definitely be a little bit higher, still is really an ideal creature for me. When I think of a carnivore, I go straight to the Carno, and they're ridiculously easy to tame too, especially in ASA, because you can just kill the parents and then press E on that baby, if obviously there's a baby relative to the parents of the Carnotauruses. Next up, we have got the Megalosaurus, and loads of people really like this creature, and I've heard them in my comments. But when I think of bigger ARC YouTubers, and when they do their top 10s, I never really hear this creature being mentioned, unless maybe in an aberration circumstance, and albeit they're really useful then, the nighttime still makes up quite a big proportion of your ARC playtime, especially if you're on Operation, then it's 100% of it. But we're not going to be talking about how great this thing is in Operation, because that's pretty much when this creature gets brought up, all everyone talks about. No, on any map, as soon as it turns into nightfall, this creature is so deadly, and it really does pack a punch, and it can even carry creatures around in its mouth and absolutely tear them to shreds to actually save me from a huge clan of Microraptors, if that's even a thing. But yeah, they really do pack a punch in terms of the damage department. They will tear things like the Carno to shreds, even things like Rexes and Alphas and all of that. They can just take out with so much ease, and they're such a small, like, versatile carnivore. It really does help them that they have all of this power behind it, as they're very mobile, very easy to use, very easy to control, and actually, frankly, pretty easy to control. Tame, that's what I meant. Did I something. Either way, they're pretty much easy in every aspect. Not as actually so easy to tame in the location they're in, but the actual taming method is very simple. I've kind of gone a bit off here, but you know, it's essentially the Troodon on loads of steroids, and it's so much easier to tame than a Troodon. If the Troodon would never make this list, of course, but yeah, the Megalosaurus is in at number 4. Next up, we have the Vonaur, and for me, this is just the upgraded Megalosaurus. It deals tons of damage, it can deal range damage, and it's around for all the day. It doesn't just need to be around at night time, albeit the Megalosaurus definitely has its place on this list. The Vonaur is my preferred creature. And, you know, some people may not agree with that. Do you agree with that? Are you a Vonaur or a Megalosaurus person? Or a Carnotaurus person? Or a Bionics person? Or what's your preferred kind of small carnivore? I know I've done many small carnivore top 10 lists before, but I actually want to know what your favourite small carnivores are. So make sure to comment that down below. And, you know, when I think of the Vonaur, I really do think of sheer power. And albeit when you level up its melee, its actual turrets don't increase in damage. If you just crank that stamina stat like I just did there, you can fire these things for ages into creatures and just absolutely decimate them. And I had a ridiculously high level theory here. It was in the 1000 somethings, and I didn't force tame a particularly high level Vonaur, so is kind of looking like it takes ages in this scenario, and obviously you wouldn't use them at this close of a range, but when you have a good level Velonasaur, you really can take out creatures like it's an FPS game, just straight like that, and that's why I absolutely love this creature. Now, the Crystal Wyvern has to be here on the list, and loads of people talk about the Wyvern just being so great and all that, and yes, I do think the Wyvern is a great creature. I just don't think it gets no, what am I thinking of? The Crystal Wyvern, sorry, doesn't get a good enough rep as it should, and the normal Wyverns get the reputation that the Crystal Wyverns should be getting as well, as they are kind of the same creature. It's just they don't come in the Wyvern trenches, and they've got another word in front of their name, so they must be worse variants of these creatures, which obviously are the Wyverns, which you'll know from Scorched Earth, as that's the map they released on. But they're far easier to tame than normal Wyverns, and the Blood Crystal Wyvern is my absolute favourite Wyvern. And the Lightning Wyvern doesn't even come close to the coolness and usefulness of the ability which you can get out of a Blood Crystal Wyvern. And again, I know I'm saying it again, they're so easy to tame. You just need to be level 65 and have been able to either knock out or kill Crystal Wyvern. I think it's knockout. And then you've got that Primal Crystal, and then you can simply just passive tame these things, and boom, like that, you have yourself a Wyvern. And albeit there's no saddles, so they have no armor, but normal Wyverns don't have that either. I really do think these creatures do deserve some consideration in a list of the most underrated creatures in 2024, as hardly anyone seems to talk about these things. And in at number 1, we have got the Blood Stalker, and I had to put this creature here, okay? I really like the Blood Stalker at the moment, and albeit, yes, you can maybe say it isn't the most underrated creature, but for the use that I use it for, I do think it is underrated, and that's why I've chucked it right at the number 1 spot. And as soon as I thought of making this video, this was the first creature that came to mind for me, so I was like, I have to put this thing in at the number 1 spot. It is the greatest water tame, in my opinion, with no comparison whatsoever. And yes, it doesn't have immunity to things like electric eels and jellyfish, but it's so quick, it can get out of there, like, you don't even have to think about it. It's just, it's so agile in the water, it can skim across the top of the water as well, and even if they do get you, it's not going to be the biggest issue. You can get yourself out of there, or you can handily deal the damage to take them all out as well. And they're not just useful in the water like most normal water creatures, which obviously just die if they're not in the water. No, these things can be taken out anywhere and used in all kinds of various situations that aren't in the water as well. And that's what makes this creature so good. And they're just so versatile, but mainly for underwater exploration, underwater travel, and just general underwater things. These are my preferred creature, and they're so good. Underwater caving, underwater getting into underwater bosses. I wouldn't actually bring them into the mode of boss fight. They're not really going to survive there. They're not boss fighting creatures, but for anything that you're already doing underwater apart from the mode of boss fight, these things are really your perfect creatures, and I don't get why people don't talk about these things being such great underwater creatures as much as I do. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below what is the most underrated art creature in 2024, as I want to know your thoughts, and do you agree with this list? And with that, I'll see you all later.